This episode of Primitive Culture is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. Oh, this may mean something.
I've been coerced into watching tonight's movie.
You do have books in the 24th century.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. We haven't run out of history quite yet.
Hello and welcome to Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture and how Star Trek relates to it. I'm Duncan Barrett, and joining me today, it's Carlos Miranda. Hi, Carlos. How are you?
Hi, Duncan. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for hosting me here in your blissfully cool office. London, at the moment, is in the midst of, I think we've kind of gone past Cardassia Prime. We're out in Vulcan's Forge or something like that by now, right?
Yeah, and I do think the Central Line is like a direct, like Mount Celea. Like it is probably the hottest place I've been to in several years. For American listeners, it's well into it's 105, I think, on the Central Line,
right.
Almost 38, 39 on the Central Line. So it's hot.
Yeah,
it's hot.
It's a new kind of hell down there, definitely, to be experienced. But today we're not talking about something hot. We're talking about something cold, something very, very cold.
Nice transition.
Some cold warriors that we're looking at. And we're looking in particular at the 1990 movie, The Hunt for Red October, which I have to say I had never seen up until a couple of days ago. And the Next Gen episode, The Face of the Enemy, which in various ways was apparently inspired by this film. And I should say to begin with, Carlos, when I first put this idea to you, it was because you'd mentioned, I think, on Twitter how much you loved this film, The Hunt for Red October. And I knew I'd never seen it, but I always kind of wanted to. And I said, well, why don't we do this episode talking about it in this Next Gen episode? And you were like, yeah, I don't see the link there. So I guess one of the things we can start by looking at is, what are these links? Is it a case of something where there's because on Primitive Culture, sometimes we talk about things where there's quite a strong connection. Sometimes we talk about things where the connection maybe was there in the background, but it didn't necessarily make it all the way through. But why don't we just start off? Tell me a little bit about your history with this film, because I know this is an important movie for you, right?
It's also a very emotional movie for me, and I'll get to that in a second. I think the picture, what happened was a few weeks ago, one of my best friends, a guy named Stephen Shepard, sent me a picture of a behind-the-scenes image of Hunt for Red October, where Alec Baldwin and Sean Connery are seated on the bridge of the Red October, but it was built on pulleys and gillies, so actually the bridge was at a 45-degree angle. It was just a really awesome behind-the-sene image that I had never seen. I knew that the bridge of the two submarines in the movie had been built on rigs and things so they could move but I had never actually seen it. So it was really, really awesome. And so I tweeted and then you got in touch. But this is one of my top 20, if not top 10 movies.
Wow.
For me. Mm-hmm. I watched it first as a kid with my dad. And my dad is a massive Tom Clancy fan. My dad has literally read and reread every Tom Clancy novel out there many, many times. And for I think last Christmas, I bought off eBay for his a first edition copy of Red October that had been signed by Tom Clancy. So he was a huge Tom Clancy fan, and I had watched it first as a kid. But then, fast forward many years later, my parents live in New York. I live in London. And we've been living here for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. And every single time, with only one exception, this is no exaggeration, no joke, every single time I go see my parents' house, one night is Hunt for Red October night. So my dad and I, we get along extremely well. I love him very much, but we're not alike at all. We're very different people. And this is like a thing that we have in common, and it's a wonderful connection. So to me, I watch the movie at least 3 times a year, always with my dad. So it's like a very it's emotional. There's a nice connection there and a nice history.
Wow, cool. Well, I mean, I'm glad that your dad enjoyed the novel as well. I have to say,
he loved the novel.
I feel kind of bad because with these things, I don't know if this is like my English literature degree or whatever, but I always I have this sort of purist idea that I should read the novel first before I watch the film, just so that I kind of know what's in there. And normally on Primitive Culture, I end up saying, even if the film is better known, go and check out the novel because it's worth reading. I found this novel almost unreadable. I liked the film. I enjoyed the film. I think it's a good story, but the way that it's written, it just did my head in. And I don't know if it's, I was listening to it on Audible. So to be fair, it could be the narration, but I didn't think there was actually anything wrong with the narrator. I thought he did a fine job. There's just something about the style that Tom Clancy writes in. He's very obsessed with technical detail. And this book was originally published by the US Navy or by some kind of like some kind of military publisher. It was not intended for a mainstream audience. So maybe that would kind of go down well. And he's also he's so interested in the technical things. The chapters and the sections are so short. It feels like you never really get to know anyone. There are no characters. They're all completely flat. Like even Jack Ryan. I mean, who is the central character in many, many of these novels, right? And in the films always seems to be played by a different actor practically every film. And it almost makes no difference because he has no personality anyway as a character. So I don't know. So I did enjoy the film. I have to say the novel, this is not a novel that I would recommend people go and check out, but it did have one very famous reader who was Ronald Reagan. And he was the one who turned this book into a bestseller basically. And then obviously out of the success of the book, came the success of the movie. And it was, they were both really big hits. I mean, for me, what works about the movie, I think, is the performances, particularly Sean Connery, who just gives this wonderfully kind of terse, cold kind of a character with real depth. Even if it's not necessarily all there on the page, you kind of get this real sense of this sort of soulful character, I suppose, in this Russian captain that he plays. And also Sam Neill is great as his kind of second in command. All the Americans kind of chewing the scenery as these like generals and captains and all these roles, which are a bit cheesy and a bit kind of OTT, but they all really commit to it and they kind of sell it. So that I think is what kind of makes that film hang together. I mean, for me, the story is interesting, but it wasn't Tom Clancy that came out of this experience as the kind of, my kind of, hero of the hour necessarily. Let's say it was more the kind of Connery, and those other actors as well who bring that to life one way or another.
Well, 2 things. I've never read a Tom Clancy novel.
I wouldn't start now if I were you.
So, I can't speak, or I've never heard one either. I cannot speak to the quality of his writing or the story or anything. But that movie to me, I forget the connection that is between me and my dad and the movie. I think that movie is one of the most perfect, military espionage Cold War movies, of the last arguably 40 years. And it's, you hear people say, oh, they don't make things like that anymore. And I genuinely think that they don't make movies like Hunt for Red October anymore. It's such a slow burn, right? And it takes, so much of it is dialogue. And even though you're in a submarine, and it's very claustrophobic, right? It really feels, I always think about how I'm rewatching season 3 of Enterprise right now, which I have not seen since I've seen some episodes, but as a whole in chronological order since it originally aired 20 years ago or whatever it was. And you remember that they wanted to design the NX-01 to be like a submarine. And there are places where it really works, like in some of the crew quarters, in Archer's ready room, where he has to bend over because of the arch. But it doesn't really work. It's not that you never get the sense that it's claustrophobic, right? Which most submarines are. And what I love about this movie is that this movie is so claustrophobic. It's such a slow burn. It's so much of it hinges on Connery and his performance. Alec Baldwin, a very young, when Alec Baldwin was this good looking, young guy. But then the remaining cast, you talk about Sam Neill, Tim Curry's in this movie, Scott Glenn is in this movie, James Earl Jones is in this movie, the supporting cast is incredible. It's incredible.
And also, of course, Gates McFadden.
Gates McFadden is in this movie. Dr. Crusher herself.
One of, I think, what maybe sort of one of two female characters probably in this movie. It is quite a kind of macho, quite a kind of male.
I can't think of who the other female character
I mean, I'm
is.
guessing. I think there is one somewhere, but it's like she's a rare, the daughter. There you go. Yeah, who probably gets more lines than Gates McFadden actually. And this was one of the projects that she was doing during her away time in the second season of Next Gen. So while
during her banishment,
exactly, while Pulaski was manning the sick bay, she was manning not a nuclear submarine as it happens. She's the wife back home.
Yeah,
and I think she did have a bigger role in the film, but it basically all ended up on the cutting room floor. Yeah. And I have to say, from her one scene, it's probably not a great tragedy because she is awful in that one scene.
But her accent. So she's supposed to be. So the whole point is that Jack Ryan is married to an English woman.
Yeah.
And lives in London.
I think he lived in Oxford or something.
Oh, well, no,
I might be pulling this out of the novel.
No, I think you're pulling this out. No, he lives in London
right, okay.
Because she drives her. Anyway, the point is that I think they live in London.
Okay.
They live in England.
They live in England.
Right? And he's married to an English woman who's played by Gates McFadden. And actually, I love Dr. Crusher. I love Gates McFadden. But she's terrible in this movie. And God knows if it was because of her performance or because of, the flow of the story. But her several scenes, and he talks about his wife and his daughter quite a bit. They're nowhere to be seen.
No. I mean, her accent is awful. Oh. I don't know whether she got the part on the strength of, I know she was a choreographer on Labyrinth, for example. She obviously had spent a certain amount of time in England. Yeah. Whether she was like, playing that card or what it was. I don't quite get why they cast her as this English character, but I don't know. Anyway, but I think you're right. Like, her character is almost irrelevant to the film anyway. She's in this one scene at the beginning. And it's interesting because this kind of goes back to what I was saying about Tom Clancy and his lack of interest in Jack Ryan as a character. This is a very small criticism of the novel. One of the things that goes on in the early chapters of the novel, where Jack Ryan is still in England and he's talking to people, is he keeps going on and on and on about this Barbie that his daughter wants for Christmas. She wants a ski action Barbie, and people keep thinking that it's a different kind of Barbie. And I was thinking, okay, fine. Well, at the end of the book, they're going to pick up on this. There's going to be a kind of motif. By the end of the book, it's completely forgotten about. We don't care what his daughter got for Christmas. And it just struck me as a little kind of microcosm of this kind of like, I'm going to try and give him this sort of personal life, but I have so little interest in it. It's just this one line that gets repeated over and over again. And then I forget that it even happened. And it is a little bit like that. I mean, in the film, you kind of expect him to go back to his family at the end, but it ends on, I guess it's kind of a joke that he's scared of flying and he can't sleep on planes, and then he's so exhausted that he's asleep on the plane, and he's got the teddy bear for his daughter. So there's a kind of hint of the family, but they find a way of returning him to family without actually having Gates McFadden or the daughter in a scene.
No, it ends with a shot of the bear. Yeah. Which the whole joke in the movie is that his daughter wants a little brother.
Right.
And so there are some components in the I think the character is infinitely more fleshed out from what you're saying in the novel, because you do get a sense. I'm sorry, not in the novel, in the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Again, haven't read the novel, but I think in the movie you get the sense that he, you learn that when he was a cadet, he was in a helicopter that went down, and he had to do his last year of school from the hospital bed, and he had to learn how to walk again.
You get all of that in the book, but it's just sort of random. What you get in the book, and this is not meant to be a podcast about me bashing Tom Clancy, but he has a very particular and very strange style. Like, he has this obsession with technical details, which, okay, fair enough, this is a techno thriller. You do want a certain amount of technical details. He also does this thing where whenever he introduces a character, he gives you sort of random bits of backstory, but in a totally clunky, sort of inorganic way, where you just sort of dump information about someone when you introduce them. And with Jack Ryan, in the book, I can't remember if it probably is in there, the thing about the helicopter, but there's also this terrorist attack that he kind of inadvertently stopped, which I imagine may crop up in one of because I think some of the books kind of go back to before this time.
That's not in not in the movie.
Right. No, no, I don't think it is in the movie. But it's just, I don't know, it's more just the sense that these characters feel very flat to me in the book, which, as I said, they don't, in the film, with the possible exception of Gates McFadden's character, who definitely does.
Who's really
does feel
barely in the movie.
He's barely there, and it is not particularly credible. She's not the only Star Trek character, we might say, who appears in this movie, because at one point I thought this was quite thrilling. Jack Ryan is coming to land on an aircraft carrier, what comes across the screen? USS Enterprise.
Exactly.
So there you go. The USS Enterprise is also in this movie,
it is,
one way or another.
And I do think it is. They shot. I could be wrong here, but they definitely, who knows if they actually shot on the Enterprise, but they definitely shot several scenes on a real aircraft carrier.
Did they? Right.
And it may have actually been the Enterprise, but in the ship that they're on is in the movie is 100% the USS Enterprise.
Right. Okay. But I mean, more so than those two sort of incidental features, I think there are reasons why. I mean, we can talk about whether we think this kind of comparison works or not. But to me, watching it and watching Face of the Enemy, there certainly were elements there that tied these two stories together. I mean, one of them is this sort of is actually a more general thing with Star Trek, I suppose, which is the idea of the cloaking device and the Romulan cloaking device. And the cloaking device does play a big role in Face of the Enemy because, in particular, you have this whole thing about that they do this kind of act of sabotage in effect. Another theme that kind of plays out, that you've got deliberate sabotage in the film, you've got deliberate sabotage in the episode, so that the Enterprise can see through the cloak. And then you've got this thing going on where the Romulan commander is basically playing a game of chicken, saying, well, if they can see me, they're going to move at the last minute, and then I'll know that they've broken our cloak, basically. Now, in the film, the whole plot of the film, and the book as well, is about the fact that this new state-of-the-art submarine, the Red October, has what's known as a caterpillar drive, which is a kind of silent means of propulsion, which means that they can get close enough, at least as Sean Connery explains it, to the coast of the US to launch a nuclear attack without anyone knowing they're there, basically. So it's exactly, functionally, the same concept as a cloaking device. It's basically, they found a way of avoiding sonar, of becoming completely invisible. And so it is that kind of Cold War feel of like, the idea of these ships that are undetectable, that you don't know where they are or what's going on. And definitely, I think in Next Gen more generally, when you have these kind of Romulan, Cold War inflected Romulan episodes, that is a big part of them. The fact that these ships kind of just shimmer into being suddenly and you realize you're surrounded. And they come out of nowhere. That is a big element of it, and it's a big part of both stories, this idea of this kind of silent running, I suppose.
No, I mean, I think that is correct. I mean, I think the caterpillar device, even as a kid, kind of making that connection, I remember being like, oh, it's like they're cloaked, right? And that's the whole thing. It's like, it's, they're looking for the Americans and Jack Ryan. They want to get a hold of the device because they want it for themselves, but also to kind of understand this new potential threat. And
so
there is an element,
it, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So they can crack it. There's definitely an element of less so in Next Gen and kind of 24th century Star Trek shows, but very much kind of that original series of like, we must get this cloaking device. What is this technology? Enterprise. Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking about. Enterprise Incident. So like this idea of there is this technology out there that could really change the balance of power. And could tip it over because they can come into our space without us ever knowing and decloak and attack us at a moment's notice. So there is that element that Star Trek plays on. And I think, it's interesting, when we were prepping for this, we talked a little bit about this, that we're always fed the lines that when Star Trek was originally created, the Klingons were very much thought to be the placeholder for the Soviet Union. The Klingons were the Russians. I never bought that. I've always thought that the Klingons were far more what Westerners think of like traditional Japanese samurai culture, like, honor above all else. And
certainly in Next Gen.
Definitely Next Gen onwards. To me, the Klingons were a stand-in for our ideas of what traditional Japanese samurai culture is and was like. But the Romulans were far more Soviet-esque, especially in Next Gen, maybe arguably even more Chinese-esque. But to me, the Cold War that's always been happening between the Federation, it's that Cold War between the Federations and the Romulans. There are very few shows, when you think about it, very, very few shows, very few movies, where you actually see Romulans and Federation ships actually engaging in combat. It's always Cold War stuff. It's always cloak and dagger. It's always cat and mouse. It's never direct contact.
Which I always loved about it. I mean, this was famously the reason that Patrick Stewart went off the Romulans, because there was an idea to bring them into insurrection. He said, I don't want Romulans. Everyone's bored of Romulans. They never do anything. Basically, because it's true. On one level, if you watch Next Gen, the Romulans always turn up. They threaten with this kind of huge amount of firepower. You get the sense those ships are like armed to the teeth. And then no one ever ends up firing their phasers. And it is exactly that kind of Cold War standoff. It's like the kind of Cuban Missile Crisis or something, effectively. I find that quite effective. I think there's a lot of tension in those scenarios.
I agree completely.
But it is true, you don't get the kind of all guns blazing like firefights that you get elsewhere, in Star Trek maybe. It's interesting what you're saying about this kind of thing about the technology though. I mean, later on in Next Gen, we learn, of course, that the Federation are forbidden from developing a cloaking device, that they actually can produce the technology. Essentially, they're sort of legally prevented from doing so. But in this kind of earlier period, I think there's a line in The Defector, which is an episode we might come and talk about in a little bit, where Picard says something like, there's got to be a way to get through this cloaking technology, or there's got to be a way, it seems like he's sort of saying this is a real strategic problem for us and we need a kind of technical solution for it. And you're right, absolutely. In The Hunt for Red October, that's what the situation is. And interestingly, in the first draft, apparently, of Face of the Enemy, the kind of, I was going to say the MacGuffin, it's not exactly a MacGuffin, but the kind of the plot device that Deanna Troi was supposed to be involved in, the end result of that plot was actually she was supposed to be handing over a Romulan ship to the Federation. Exactly as in Red October, Sean Connery him and his crew are defecting, his officers, because there's this kind of interesting contrast. It's basically him and his senior staff, essentially, who lock the door on their cabin and plot this defection together. None of the lower decks crew know that it's happening, even right up to the very end of the film. So it's on the one hand, they want to defect because they want a new life in America. But for him, it's also the fact that he actually wants to give up this technology because he doesn't want he doesn't trust his own superiors not to use it immorally. And he wants to hand this technology over so that the Americans and the West can kind of study it and learn how to counteract it, in a sense. And I suppose that parallel, it would have been stronger if they'd stuck with that idea that it was a Romulan ship that was being handed over. A prototype or whatever it is.
A brand new type of cloaking device.
Exactly, a new kind of cloaking device, or a new kind of, a bit like in Star Trek 6, the ship that can fire when it's cloaked or whatever. And we think, okay, this is too much of a strategic advantage. We're going to give up this technology. Now, in fact, what they end up with is these defectors instead who are in stasis. So they're kind of like it's weird because they're people, but they're kind of non-people because they're literally asleep for the whole thing. Interestingly, though, apparently they were toying with the idea that one of them might be Spock. Michael Piller was quite keen on the idea that one of them might be Spock. And then, in fact, furthermore, in the idea that Spock might have died in this process in some way, they quite liked the idea of just killing Spock randomly, I think. I mean, to me, aside from the fact that I don't think it really, I'm glad they didn't kill Spock off in that way. But also, I don't really think it makes sense because if it was Spock, he's not defecting. Do you know what I mean? And they have set up this whole sort of theme of these Romulans who are sort of working against the Romulan command, in a sense, and trying to engage with the Federation and trying to do this stuff. And that's sort of what Spock is doing. He's kind of helping get people out and stuff. But then you take away the idea of someone switching allegiances and switching sides, because Spock, we know, is a Federation citizen. He's doing his work on Romulus or whatever. But that's a whole different story somehow if you tell it that way.
I do think, I agree that the stakes are not, by doing that, by having made three people that you don't know anything about, it's like Proconsul such and such, and there's two top aides.
And everyone looks at him, they're like, Proconsul so and so,
like that doesn't pack any sort of emotional or dramatic, punch. And so it is dialed down significantly from Red October in the sense that they are this like truly strategic first strike weapon. But what I do like about the fact that it's like this like random people, these random Proconsul with his two top aides, is the fact that it serves as a slight reminder, dare I say, continuation sequel to Unification 1 and 2, which are such amazing episodes of Next Generation, especially Unification 1. And it's such a big, given that it's Spock and given that it's unification of the two species and such, it's such a big story with massive geopolitical ramifications for the Trek universe, right? That it's just nice to be reminded that was also happening, even though they never, ever again, they never bring it up, really, right? Yes, randomly they bring it up in Star Trek 09, with kind of Spock's work with the Romulans, but they don't bring it up for basically 20 years of Star Trek.
It doesn't come up in Nemesis, weirdly.
Doesn't come up in Nemesis.
Would be the obvious time to kind of read.
Well, the flip side is that you never hear about Remans at any point until Nemesis. So there are,
maybe Nemesis is a little bit of a bump in the road. And obviously Nemesis is clearly the point where Patrick Stewart lost that argument about not including the Romulans in the film, and who knows?
Well, isn't it that John Logan really loved the idea of the Romulans, and somebody pushed for it to be Romulans?
And you can see also, I mean, John Logan, of course, famously wrote Gladiator, very interesting kind of Roman culture. There is a lot of that kind of Romans, Romulans, Romulus and Remus, and all that kind of thing. There's a lot of that in there. It's also in The Hunt for Red October. bizarrely, the character played by Sean Connery is actually called Captain Ramius, which is extremely close to Romulus. When I first listened to this audiobook, I was like, what? What did they say his name was? I mean...
Well, I always thought that was like the element of like, there was obviously an element of like duality of who he was, and so that like they're playing on, I'm sure Clancy was playing on that with the name as well, of like the fact that like, he's Lithuanian but working for the Soviets.
Yes.
He wants
he's
to
a Riemann, basically.
He's a Riemann, exactly.
You're right. He's not a Russian. He's a Lithuanian.
Exactly. And so it's just an interesting kind of component. Just goes, unlike the book, apparently, it's a nice way of deepening the character in the movie.
Well, actually, one element that I would say that is in the book and I don't think was mentioned in the film is that the reason for his defection. In the film, it seems more sort of ostensibly political, which actually, chimes more with the kind of defections that you see in Next Gen. It's always a kind of ideological thing. It's always about that kind of, my government is doing something I can't support and I'm going to have to switch sides. In the book, it's actually more clearly about his wife who's died. That basically this has kind of broken him because his wife has died. And interestingly, there's a kind of parallel there with the Romulan captain, Taref, in Face of the Enemy. It's the Sean Connery character. Well, he's not Sean Connery in the book, obviously. The Ramius character, I was going to say the Romulan captain. I'm going to get my head twisted in knots. The Russian captain, even if he's Lithuanian, the Soviet captain, has lost his wife. And they do talk about this in the film. Various people, including Jack Ryan, I think, says to him, I'm so sorry to hear about your wife.
On the anniversary of his mother, of his wife's death.
That's right. It's the anniversary of her death. But I don't think they explained in the film, unless I missed it, that the key thing is that his wife was killed by a sort of botched job by a dodgy doctor, and the doctor has been protected by the authorities because he's like the son of some, high-ranking Soviet official or something. And so basically, it's not so much just that his wife has died, it's that he's been unable to get justice for his wife's death. And that's really what's tipped him over, is this kind of personal wound in a sense. And it's kind of interesting because in Face of the Enemy, you have a similar thing where the Romulan captain's hatred of the Tal Shiar and real hostility towards Major Rakal, who, is the character Deanna Troi is basically impersonating, is based on this story that she tells about her father being dragged out of his bed at night and taken away, and she never saw him again. So it's that idea of, someone who, yes, they're a captain in the military of this empire or whatever it is, but at the same time someone in their own family has been mistreated by that system. It's given them the kind of insight into the corruption or the cruelty or the kind of darker side of that. And it's interesting. I mean, obviously the Romulan captain is not going to make her defect. It's not going to make her do something like that. One of the things that struck me is she can be quite open about her feelings. Do you know what I mean? She can be quite outspoken on her own ship, and she can kind of talk down to Deanna Troi and sort of talk down about the Tal Shiar and so on. In The Hunt for Red October, one of the things that's quite interesting, I think, is that because it is only the senior staff who know about this thing, and the rest of the crew, like sort of in public, everyone has to toe the line. Everyone has to say, yes, comrade this and comrade that. And everyone has to sing the national anthem and do all this stuff and kind of totally go along with the kind of apparatus of the state in a sense. And you see that because initially, I mean, at the very beginning of the film, there's this scene with the political officer, played by Peter Firth from Spooks. Weirdly, as this character who, spoilers, is not in the film for very long because Sean Connery dispatches him quite suddenly and quite brutally. But it still makes quite an impact, I think, the idea of having this guy on the ship, having this guy who hands the captain his orders, who's kind of this intermediary character. And this really is the character who Deanna Troi is effectively playing. It's this Tal Shiar character. She's the political character.
And he's KGB. He's KGB. And so
instead of being oft in like the first scene, pretty much, she's a part of the story. But you do in some ways with the Red October film, although Peter Firth's character is off very quickly, you get the sense, of these other kind of loyalists among the crew, other people who like Tim Curry, for example. Everyone seems a bit suspicious of him. Do they, they certainly aren't letting him on on their plot. He's the doctor on the ship. There's another guy who it's slightly unclear where his loyalties are. There turns out to be another agent, a secret agent, basically a KGB or, some kind of secret service agent on the ship who's posing as a cook. So this kind of idea of, which I think does translate quite well to the Next Gen episode, this ship where you don't quite know who of your crew is to be trusted.
Yeah.
You know, the Romulan captain, she has the guy, for example, who's the one handling Troi, essentially. So she's got at least 2 people on her ship, plus the guy in engineering who's the one who's going to sabotage the thing. So that's 3 people on her ship who are basically working against her one way or another. And I think that's where a lot of the tension in both the film and in that episode comes from, is that kind of sense of not quite knowing who to trust, not quite being able to speak truthfully, not kind of being open. Very different to the situation on a Federation starship where, you know, Captain Picard doesn't, generally speaking, have to worry about that. I mean, when we see it in, say, in the Drumhead, the idea of like double agents on the ship or whatever, he pretty much doesn't believe it. He's deeply skeptical about it, and we don't really, I suppose, until Deep Space Nine with someone like Eddington, we don't really see that idea so much of. So, you know, and then it's one person, you know, it's Eddington in DS9, it's Seska in Voyager. There's like a bad egg or something, but that kind of feeling that you get on the Romulan ship of like, who can I trust among these people? Do I really know them? Do I really trust them? And it comes up in Red October, because the only reason that he can trust his senior staff, it's not because he has been serving with them for a while. It's because he trained all of them. So he knows them going way back, and he's actually deliberately assembled this senior staff of very trusted, very loyal people who he knows are not going to betray him.
No, I mean, I think that's true. And I think it's very consistent as well with the way Romulans have been portrayed for almost the entire series, right? Across, you know, whatever series, whatever episode, whatever movie, is this idea that everyone in Romulan society is scared of each other. And that's that's this unhealthy glue that kind of keeps the society together. And that's very Soviet, or at least the way we imagine the Soviet Union to have been. And I think, you know, you think of episodes like Unification, where, you know, you have the woman who owns the restaurant that Picard and Data are having lunch at, and she's not quite trusting of them, and she calls the authorities over. You know, obviously you have Romulan senator in Nemesis that basically assassinates the entire rest of the Senate. You know, you have episodes of Deep Space Nine where the episode with that in Latin that no one can pronounce, where Bashir goes to Romulus, right? Like there's
Interama enim solent leges.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Sounds like a Harry Potter spell. Yeah. But it is, so I do think that's extremely consistent across every series, across every movie, that the Tal Shiar, that the Romulan Senate, that the Romulan military, right down to Romulan citizens themselves, are all extremely skeptical of each other.
And kind of closed.
Exactly. Even though they're extremely emotional as a people, obviously in comparison to the Vulcans, but they're very kind of closed. They're very like, they're each person is like a tomb, and they don't quite trust each other, and that tension. I actually think that's what makes the Romulans so interesting, because the Klingons wear their hearts on their sleeves, right? The Borg are after one thing, and they're wonderful villains, but in many respects, until the Borg Queen, they were one-dimensional in a terrifying sort of zombie way. You know, I think the Cardassians actually, in many respects, are the most. They're Soviet-esque in many ways.
They are, absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, there's a kind of parallel there. I mean, people always talk about them as the Nazis, I suppose. And there's that as well. You know, they're both kind of totalitarian regimes where you don't dare to speak your mind. But interestingly, I mean, I had Una McCormack on the show recently. I was saying to you, in her novel, The Never-Ending Sacrifice, which is all about kind of Cardassia, and sort of plays through right from like early DS9 right through to the end of DS9 and then onwards. It's sort of almost like slotting in the gaps and filling in stuff politically. It's very interesting because it made me realize, and I suppose this is one of the things Star Trek novels can do, but I think it does it particularly successfully. It kind of makes you reevaluate what you're seeing on the shows, because you know, you're only seeing a tiny sliver of that society, and that you're seeing someone like Gul Dukat, you're seeing someone from the military, and there's a whole sort of political process going on behind, and there's a whole kind of civilian domestic process going on underneath that. And she absolutely captures that idea of this kind of uncertainty, instability, fear of people living in that. Just ordinary people trying to live their lives in a society that are the kind of challenges of that. Even things like not having adequate drinking water, or like basic provisions, which is all there on the screen in a sense, in that we know that the Cardassians like screwed over their own planet, they screwed over Bajor, they kind of, you know, they come in and they make a mess of everything, essentially. But to see that from the kind of ordinary person's perspective, rather than just being, to see it rather than being told it, I suppose, does make a big difference. But I think you're right, absolutely. With the Romulans, you've got that kind of baked into the premise of the Romulans, certainly to be honest, from the beginning, but certainly in Next Gen, even from the first time they appear in the neutral zone, it's this idea of this mysterious enemy. We don't, we know very little really about them. We never know what they're up to. There's always a scheme. There's always a plot. There's always something, nothing is ever what it seems with them. There's always kind of, something else going on. And I think absolutely, say in Face of the Enemy, you've got that tension, which is there in Red October as well, of, trying to communicate with them. I mean, there's the scene in Red October where Alec Baldwin and Sean Connery are trying to communicate across these two nuclear subs without, on Connery's sub, other people literally in the room with him kind of realizing what's happening.
One ping.
And the kind of tension, exactly, all this stuff. Yeah, one ping.
Yeah.
One ping.
One ping.
These pings keep pinging back and forth.
Yeah.
And this is the only kind of extremely limited communication that they can have. And you kind of have that again in Next Gen, where you have Deanna Troi talking to Picard, and Picard needs to put his poker face on basically and pretend that he's never seen her before, and he he doesn't recognize her or whatever, and he accepts her as this Romulan operative. So again, that kind of idea of, and she's playing one thing to Picard, she's playing one thing to the captain, she's playing something else to the guy who's sort of handling her. Everything is so carefully controlled and sort of talking in code and kind of speaking without saying what you're saying necessarily, and all that kind of, which I suppose is the whole kind of espionage thriller side of it that both these things are kind of leaning on one way or another.
But I think that's what you just touched on, is again why I think the Romulans are in many respects so underused, but when they are used, they can be used so wonderfully and surgically. I mean, you think of some episodes, I think Face of the Enemy is 100% the best Troi storyline. Like there's no better episode for Troi than Face of the Enemy. Marina Sirtis says it all the time. My wife, who's not a Trekkie, I was telling you, my wife, who is not a Trekkie, but watches Star Trek with me all the time, just loves to make fun of how bad Deanna Troi is as a character, and she's not a fan of Marina Sirtis' acting. Like the whole, like she gets such joy out of like loving to hate Troi, right?
Yeah.
And I made her watch this with me, and she was like, "That was phenomenal." And she's like, "Do they have to give her oversized shoulder pads for her to act and like for her to have a great storyline?" So I think that when you think of things like In the Pale Moonlight, you think of episodes like when you really think about it, they're just phenomenal villains. You think of Redemption, like them pulling the strings in the Klingon Civil War. These are phenomenal villains, and it's always because they don't do the dirty work. They always get someone else to do it. There's always a hidden agenda. There's always something there. And I look forward to like talking about Picard, because clearly, the Romulans are going to play a big part in this new series that we're getting. So I've become a very big fan of the Romulans because of all the things that they never do. Because it's always behind the scenes. There's always an alternative motive. It's always cat and mouse, cloak and dagger.
And there's always a cover story. That's the thing, especially if you think of like Tomalak as a character. Okay, on the one hand, he's always making threats he doesn't follow through with. On the other hand, he always has these kind of sort of implausible cover stories for everything that's going on, whether it's who's on Galundon Core, how many of them. And they are very like the Cardassians. The Cardassians, again, always spinning everything, putting out these stories that, no one really believes in. But actually, it reminded me a little bit, there's a great character in The Hunt for Red October who's basically the Soviet ambassador. And he has these scenes with the American guy. It's not the president, I think. He's like the president. They avoid showing the president.
No, they don't show the president. It's the Secretary of Defense.
Right, yeah. Whereas in the book, I think it is the president who kind of does all of this. So for whatever reason, they decide not to show it. But he's just kind of ridiculous, because he's there sitting in the office and he's just peddling all these like lies basically the whole time. Everyone knows they're lies. First of all, it's that maybe a ship's gone missing, or that the ship has sunk, and they're like, they know clearly that's not true. Then when they realize there's a possibility that Sean Connery is going to successfully defect, they try to convince the Americans that he's actually planning to launch a nuclear attack on America and ask for their help in shooting him down, basically. Again, at that point, there's a slightly bigger question over whether that might be true or not. And really, it's Alec Baldwin kind of leading the charge of saying, look, this is just propaganda, basically. But I suppose just that idea of the person who's like parroting their political,
like it's a political line.
It's a line, exactly. It's the line. The party line. And then the diplomat on the other side has to sort of, can't call them out for lying, but at the same time is, clearly deeply skeptical of everything that comes out.
But those are such wonderful scenes in the movie, because they both know they're lying. They both know the other is lying. They both will continue to lie to each other, and they will both kind of, it's okay. It's accepted. That's the role that each of them is there to play. And I think it works wonderfully. There's that great line of how, the Soviets have dropped enough sonar buoys from Greenland to Scotland that you can walk from one to the other without getting wet, which is just like a brilliant line. And it is. And I think the Romulans in next gen far more than the Klingons, who were for the most part a blunt instrument, and I always think, going back to what you were saying earlier, is that, the Klingons have have the potential for such great stories, but we're always like seeing it through the military, through the political military kind of warrior class. And there are episodes where they make, comments about the fact that not all Klingons are warriors, and some of them are really into art and obviously music and opera and food and all these things. And we get these glimpses of other elements of Klingon culture, but because we're being told basically a military story. I mean, Starfleet, we don't ever think about it the way Starfleet is the military, right?
Yeah.
Just ask Carol Marcus. And so obviously they deal with their military counterparts. So that's the story we're told. But it is wonderful when you get these other glimpses. And I always think the Klingons that's for another podcast.
I always find it kind of hard to buy when the Klingons do go in for that real sort of skullduggery. And I mean, if you think of like Arne Darwin in Trouble with Tribbles, or then Vogue in Discovery, I mean, because it doesn't feel very Klingon. Do you know what I mean? That is exactly what you expect the Romulans to do. You expect them to be, I mean, say, in the mind's eye, to do their kind of Manchurian Candidate routine on Geordi. And also, the thing I always find fascinating about that episode is, who is that guy who they send to Risa, who sort of looks vaguely like maybe he's Levar. I mean, is he a human who's working? Like, are they paying him? Is he a Romulan disguised as a human?
I always thought he was just
is he a robot? I mean, he doesn't speak.
I always thought it was kind of like an altered Romulan, because that's kind of the stuff that they do. So in my head, that was always like, that made, that's what I thought was canon.
Something about the way that they kind of talk down. He doesn't seem to be in on the plot exactly, though. It's like he's like someone they kind of hired for this job. I don't know. There's something kind of weird about that. But you do get this sense as well, also, of like defection, going back and forth and back and forth. And this is a big theme. Obviously, it's a big theme in Red October because, Sean Connery's defecting. Sam Neill, actually, as his sort of second in command, is the one who I think carries more of the kind of sense of the kind of lifestyle shift of the defector, if you know what I mean. He's got this idea. He says he wants to marry a fat American girl and raise rabbits in Montana, basically. He's kind of like totally bought into this sort of American dream idea, I suppose. Much more so than Connery. I don't feel we don't... I feel like even at the very end, there's a slight question mark over what's his life going to be like.
Connery was doing something... I think the Connery character, Ramis, was doing something where he thought, like, he was doing something for the good of the world.
Kind of noble.
It was noble. It was noble. It was the right thing to do. It was not about lifestyle, because you can imagine that he lived a very comfortable life back, given that he was the top Soviet commander. So I don't think for him it was about money. It wasn't about lifestyle. It was the right, noble thing to do, because he knew that people in his government would use the weapon as first strike, which would lead the Americans to retaliate, and you basically had worldwide, World War III at best, and worldwide destruction at worst, right? So I think to him it was about doing the right thing, doing the noble thing. People like Sam Neill, it was all about a lifestyle shift, and like getting freedom, exactly,
which comes out certainly more so, I think, even in the book. Actually, there's a kind of scene at the end where Jack Ryan kind of gives the sort of, America's great, you'll love it kind of speech, essentially sort of saying how free you're going to be and how wonderful. And also, and they talk about this a lot in the book, I don't think it really comes up in the film, that they're going to get tons of money. Basically, the CIA will bankroll them to some huge extent, and they'll be living the life of Riley in the States. But it's kind of interesting. I think with Connery, there's a slightly more almost kind of tragic. He seems quite lonely at the end of the film. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's done this thing, but he's cut himself off from everything in doing it. And it reminds me, actually, in a way, of another Next Gen episode, The Defector, which is pretty much a contemporary of Hunt for Red October. And I imagine that episode could well have been inspired by that film as well, because I think they came out at around the same time. And there you've got a character who, again, is giving up his whole life, giving up his family, because he's got a daughter back home on Romulus, again, because he believes that he has to provide this piece of information, which then ultimately turns out to be worthless. He's been played by his own people.
Which is very Romulan.
He's very Romulan, and is and it's played in a totally kind of tragic way. Like, here's this guy making this noble sacrifice, and actually it's for nothing. He ends up, killing himself as a result, because he's kind of given his life up for this thing that was, wasn't worth a penny.
Mm-hmm. But you get this sense that like Sean Connery Ramis would do that as well. Like if he would take his own life. Like you got that sense. There is a certain that beautiful shot at the end when the Red October is in Maine and like in a river in Maine, which is, as Jack Ryan says, no one will ever think this far north, because it is pretty far north. So they're just coming in from Canada into Maine, and it's this like extremely secluded, extremely quiet, sad and lonely place. And it's very much a reflection of where I think, not, to Jack Ryan, he saved the day. He has, basically written his own his career. Some of the other Russians are defecting, but to Ramis, it's the end of his life. He's like, this is it. Like, it's his life, his entire life as he knew it is no longer. And so there's a certain melancholy in his character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting when I was looking into it, the Ramis character is, and the story of Red October is itself based sort of loosely on various historical events, a couple in particular, one involving the submarine, another involving, there's a guy called Jonas Plaskus, who again was a submarine tender captain. I think that means it was not like a state-of-the-art submarine or whatever. And he ended up, sort of defecting to Sweden, in the States, I think. But that whole sense of like giving up your allegiance to your country, giving up, for some people maybe it's easy. I mean, if you're ideologically opposed to what your country is doing anyway, then maybe it's kind of a no-brainer in a sense. But I think it nonetheless, sort of on a cultural level, is very difficult. I mean, I read a book a few years ago now, a book called Nothing to Envy, which was a book about North Korean defectors crossing over into the South. And what this woman had done was gone to she was based in South Korea. She was a bureau chief for some big American newspaper, the Washington Post or something in South Korea. But she had decided to interview people who'd come from the north and basically find out about their lives and what it was like crossing over. And for a lot of them, it was a really gradual process of sort of disillusionment with that regime. They'd grown up totally sold on the propaganda, singing that Nothing to Envy was a line from one of these kind of patriotic songs all the kids had to sing all the time, and so on. And really, the struggles that made them get to a point where they thought, actually, I can't live in this country anymore. I have to get away from this. This is wrong. It's not straightforward. It's not a really easy thing. It's actually a really difficult choice. And for some of them, something that they struggled to really ever make a life in this kind of very different, westernized kind of modern, more like what we would consider a kind of normal environment in a sense. I mean, one character in that book in particular was a mother who her daughter, I think, had defected before, and she ended up following her. But she was totally a real sort of party loyalist, and it was a really difficult thing for her, and she never really adjusted to life, in a more kind of Western, for want of a better word, country in a sense, because that was not what she was used to. It was very difficult, and you get that definitely in The Defector with he has that line, "These are not my stars." This idea of it's never going to be home. However well treated he is, or however kind of righteous the causes that he's defecting for, he's always going to be kind of a man alone in some way by putting himself in that position. But it is kind of interesting in Nexium, you do get quite a lot of these defectors back and forth with the Romulans. I mean, in Face of the Enemy, you've got this guy who's defected and then he's defecting back again. I mean, why anyone, I kind of get why, maybe this is just like human centrism, but I sort of get why the Romulans might defect to the Federation. I'm slightly unclear why a Federation citizen defects to the Romulans, but whatever.
He talks
There's
about
something in
sense of order and focus, so maybe it's very weird. But also,
talk about that.
I was watching that episode, and I was like, my wife and I were like, that is literally the most unflattering costume ever put on a human being. It's like they put him in a sausage casing, and it's extremely unflattering, and it's very hard to focus on him wearing that outfit. I think Riker chose this costume because when he first arrives, he says, "Get out of that uniform." He's really angry about him being in a Romulan uniform. He's probably sent a memo down to the Enterprise's
tailoring shop or whatever to say like, I want this guy to look like an idiot.
Yeah.
Basically. It doesn't help that he's still got this kind of slightly crap Romulan haircut.
Yeah. Or wear like a wig, like a horrible Romulan wig.
He just looks sort of slightly hopeless, that guy.
Yeah.
But anyway, you do get this sense of these people kind of going, kind of defecting back and forth, whether it's Admiral Jarek in The Defector or, but that guy in this story and the politician, of course, who the story is kind of more centered around, who's going to defect to the Federation and bring his secrets or bring his political clout with him. Whatever. Yeah.
What's interesting, he does say something that I think is really interesting in the scene where he's brought into the ready room with Worf. And Picard says, why didn't you tell us this information before? And he says something, on Romulus, you learn not to volunteer any information until you have to.
Yeah.
And it's just another piece of like interesting insight into Romulan society.
Yeah. That sort of closed.
Yeah.
Living under a totalitarian regime.
Exactly.
That's what when I probably mentioned this before, and I apologise to the listeners for always bringing things back to this subject. But when I did my book about the Channel Islands, one of the guys
you wrote a book about the Channel Islands?
Yeah. One of the guys I interviewed there, I said to them, I asked everyone what was the worst thing about living under the Germans for 5 years, and a lot of people it was like, we had no food, or we thought we'd be arrested or whatever. And he said the thing that was the hardest for him was he just didn't feel he could be himself. He had to second guess everything he said to anyone because he didn't know if someone might be listening, or they might, dob him into the authorities or whatever it was. And it was just that sense of self-censorship, which is what comes with living under that kind of regime. And that was it crushed him. Do you know what I mean? It crushed him as a person just to feel like he couldn't ever relax, essentially, because he was always worrying, what if I say the wrong thing and there's going to be some kind of consequence? And I suppose to go from a society like that to a society where you can kind of speak your mind, broadly speaking. I mean, they talk about that, certainly in the novel of Red October. I can't remember if it comes out in the film, but I think it is this scene at the end between Jack Bryan and Ramius, and he sort of basically he says something like, you can come to America, see how we do things, and then tell us we're getting it all wrong. That's what everyone else does. Yeah. And it's that idea that basically you have the freedom to say when you think we're crap or when you think our values are wrong, or do you know what I mean? And that's almost the most important thing, is being able to criticize as well as just be the yes man and go along with everything, which is so different, of course, to what you see in the kind of Soviet military in that story with like with Peter Firth's character, the political guy, with these other guys on the ship that no one quite trusts, that no one quite dares to question anything or to say what they're really thinking at any time.
I mean, not to turn into like Voyager bashing, but I think that's what an element. Chakotay brings it up in an episode really early on in the first season, and it's such a shame that they didn't follow through with it, right? That like this idea that Chakotay had not one but two undercover spies right under his nose, and he didn't know it, and he's like, am I stupid? How did I not know? Both, Seska and obviously Tuvok. And it's such a shame that they didn't play that out a lot more in terms of his own, psyche and, what it meant. I mean, the integration of the Maquis into Starfleet at the end of the very first episode is, I think, one of the greatest kind of missed opportunities in all of Star Trek history. But that's for another podcast. But it is such a shame that he didn't have that paranoia that you think he should have had for a long, long time.
Maybe it's just because Chakotay's a nice guy and he thinks everyone else is kind of as straight up as he is. Maybe it's because the Maquis, there was this real, the Maquis are often presented in Star Trek as being a bit naive, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? They're kind of idealistic. They're idealistic, they're naive. They kind of don't almost think anyone would be working against them in that way. Do you know what I mean? And they maybe think if someone comes along and says, I believe in, freedom for the demilitarized zone or whatever, it doesn't cross their mind that they might actually not think that at all. If that seems like the right thing. I mean, almost maybe a bit like, we've had all these things coming out here about these police going undercover in, amongst environmentalists or, kind of left-wing groups, basically, and these police having relationships with these women in these groups and so on. The idea of these kind of infiltrators who seem to be signed up to your kind of noble ideals and in fact are, secretly working against you. But I suppose that's quite different from, well, at least to me, that seems different. If you're the kind of anti-authority group, and you're the kind of idealists, and you're the ones kind of questioning everything and saying what you think is right, compared to if you're representing the state and the military and so on. And I guess what's interesting with the Romulans is you have got, just as in the Soviet system, these kind of two levels. You've got the military and then you've got the intelligence community, and they are kind of working against each other, or there's a definite conflict there, and they both have a certain amount of power. And we see it again, I guess, with Section 31. You could say in Discovery, for example, there's that scene where Pike has that line, "The chair outranks the badge." And it's exactly that kind of moment. It's almost exactly what you're seeing on the Romulan ship in Face of the Enemy, of the captain saying, "Okay, fine, you're Tal Shiar, but this is my ship, and I give the orders here," essentially. And, but sort of pushing that, but at the same time, you get the sense she can't push too far, because actually, who knows whether Troi's character could get, not just get people bumped off, but she makes some remark at some point about how their families are going to be, they'll go after their families, which again is very much that kind of totalitarian sort of.
But I think, not to go too deep dive on this, or not to deep dive too much on this, but like that tension of the military and the intelligence is kind of a key component to making and the chaos that causes is what makes the paranoia, and it's part of the mixture of why totalitarian regimes work, ironically.
Interestingly, we see it in The Hunt for Red October on the American side as well, though, because Jack Ryan works for the CIA, and the naval people initially are quite suspicious of him because they think he's a spook or whatever. And then I suppose they kind of realise that, he works for, he's not really CIA. Do you know what I mean?
He was a Marine.
He writes history books. Yes, and he was a Marine originally, and it's kind of like he's ended up as a CIA analyst somehow. But he's not some kind of shady customer. Really, he's again pretty straight down the line.
No, but I think that the that tension is so important, and you do see it wonderfully in the Romulan ship. But I think there's an element of like, this is my ship, and at the end of the day, I still give the orders, but you keep them at arm's length. You don't piss them off too much, to the point that in Red October they have to kill him.
Exactly.
And they make it look like an accident, right? And the doctor.
He has that great line. He says, "There's been a terrible accident."
Exactly. Like so nonchalant about the whole thing. But they had to kill him, because if not, there's no way that they could have done it. And then they find out, obviously, there's someone else who's out there who's a spy. And it's interesting in Deep Space Nine, you mentioned 31, obviously later on, you do all of a sudden start thinking, oh wow, are there Section 31 operatives on other Starfleet vessels? And what you leave behind in the documentary, when they talk about season 8 of Deep Space Nine, Bashir is the chief, the chief medical officer on Dax's ship, but he's also running 31, running section part of Section 31.
And also in Enterprise, of course, you've got Reed, who it turns out, 4 years in, we discover has this kind of other sort of other loyalty and this other agenda. Again, so that kind of idea that you might be, working. And actually, that's something that comes through again in the novel that I don't think is in the film, is that Jack Ryan is to some extent doing that, because he's being asked to kind of send back information to the White House without necessarily informing the people who are kind of looking after him on the mission, if you see what I mean. So he is almost a kind of spy. It's just he's a totally upstanding, honest, kind of decent spy. Whereas the character that Deanna Troi is playing is, she really steps up. It's interesting. She starts off by, because she's obviously uncomfortable being put in this role. It's obviously like way out of her comfort zone. It is a stretch. I don't know if it's a stretch for Marina Sirtis, but it's certainly a stretch for Deanna Troi to play that. And she starts off by kind of saying, well, I'm quite new. I've only been doing it a few months or whatever. So she sort of plays down her authority. But then by the end, she's really pushing it, and she's making threats, and she's saying she's going to go after people's families and their children and everything. And she's like totally embraced this kind of quite scary character, really. So, and it's kind of interesting, she does change a lot during the course of that episode, to the extent that towards the end, when they beam her back to the Enterprise, and it's literally just, she just smiles, and you suddenly think, oh yeah, that's Deanna Troi. That's the character your wife hates.
Exactly.
We've been seeing something very different for the rest of the story.
And it's just a shame, because I think that Troi is by no means in my top 10% of Star Trek characters across any series. But that episode showed that had that character been written slightly different, had that character been given something else to do, that could have been a very interesting character. I can think of other moments when Troi was forced to be outside of her comfort zone. And those are the best times where that character shines. In what's that episode? That horrible 7th season episode where she makes Commander, where Data is like being
Dino himself.
Exactly. And, I mean, the A story is ridiculously awful. Yet the B story, where she's taking the commander's test and the holodeck, she basically has to order Geordi to do something that will most likely, if not definitely, get him killed for the sake of the ship. And that's part of the character test. Like, that's a phenomenal Troi story, right? I think Troi works best when they really played against type of character. I also think that the idea of the Troi character is ridiculous. Like, obviously, having a therapist on a ship like that makes sense. Having a therapist who's part of the senior crew that sits literally like in the Holy Trinity next to the captain and advises the captain with things like, who says things like, I think they mean it, or I can't read anything. He's very close. Like, he has no value whatsoever on the bridge.
It's always a bit ambiguous, isn't it? Because she's really there. She's on the bridge, not because you don't get the sense that every ship that has a counselor has the counselor on the bridge. She's there because she has basically a superpower, because she's got this kind of empathy.
But then it never works.
No, and then there's a problem. Yes, of course. Then there's a problem that it kills any tension or ambiguity in storytelling. Yeah. So you can't really use. You have to find ways of neutralizing it, or just making it only come across when she's saying something obvious anyway. But it's interesting in this story. Apparently, they were originally going to use Gates McFadden in this story, and it was going to be Crusher who went undercover, which would have been interesting since she was the one who didn't make it onto the Red October and she stayed at home in England.
She didn't make it in Red October, she didn't make it in the Romulan ship.
She didn't make it to the Romulan ship. I know, poor old Gates McFadden.
Poor old Gates.
But then apparently they decided that they thought it would make more sense for Troi to do it because of her empathic skills. Well, there is that one scene which is quite effective where she says, "Oh, that guy's lying," and then the other guy kills him. And she's really shocked. She's like, "I didn't want you to kill him," and it kind of implicates her, I suppose. Other than that, though, I feel like she doesn't really. I don't know if it is so much that she needs her empathic skills. I think it's more that because she's such a soft, kind, sweet character. I was never that wild about Troi growing up. As I've got older, I've come to appreciate her more, funnily enough. I don't know why. I like her more as a character than I didn't hate her, but I just found her a bit nothingy. Yeah. These days when I watch Next Gen, I kind of appreciate her presence more. Mm-hmm. I find her quite a nice
you should have a chat with her.
Element. I know, yeah, definitely. But I mean, I think it's more that it's just such a contrast to her regular character, what she has to do. And it would be for Dr. Crusher too. But somehow, because Troi is always the one being kind and being nice and being kind of sensitive and understanding, it is a real shift somehow.
See, it worked really well when they tried to do it with Cass in that Warlord episode or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
That didn't work for me.
Right, okay.
That didn't work. And partly it's probably, you could say, the material.
That.
Really?
I like that version of Cass.
Yeah. No, it didn't work for me in the same way that...
Because you didn't buy it.
Because I didn't buy it.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't buy it. I think...
It's a bit of a stretch.
This one I bought completely.
Yeah.
And I think because you see the transition in this one where she's like, what am I supposed to do? And she's so afraid and like nervous. And at the end, when she figures out that Nivek has no plan, and she goes, "You have no plan, Nivek, now you're doing things my way. And if not, I'll tell the guard to throw you at the airlock." And all of a sudden she really embraces
and
this.
And you almost start to think, is she just bluffing, or do you know what I mean? You're right. It's quite convincing somehow. She really throws herself into that part. By the end.
Both Troi throws herself into the Major
Rakal.
And I think Marina really throws herself into the role. So I just think it just works. Whereas opposed to Cass, it just didn't quite.
Right.
I didn't quite buy it.
Yeah. Well, and then of course you end up with the same storyline almost with Kira, coming up in DS9, sort of playing this kind of thing with a different kind of inflection on it.
But kind of the opposite, right? Because Kira is meant to be this loving daughter.
Yes.
And and actually, Troi is, Kira is far more like the Major, no pun intended, but then she is this kind of soft-spoken. So, and that's one of in my book that has, that scene where where Sisko and Garak are on the ship, or on the Defiant, and they come across not was going to say Romulan, but the Cardassian patrol ship, and then Garrick shuts everything down. It's one of the greatest scenes in all of Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
So anyway, for another topic.
Definitely for another topic. Well, one of the things that interests me about these kind of Cold War stories, I suppose, is you've got Next Gen, which obviously, I mean, the original series was running kind of at the height of the Cold War, and you did have, I'd say you did have, with both the Romulan, I mean, the Enterprise incident is really like a kind of spy thriller, espionage thriller, essentially. But you also had the Klingons cast in these kind of Cold War roles. By the time you get to Next Gen, obviously, it's the very kind of tail end of the Cold War. I mean, the Defector is like 1990, so the Berlin Wall has fallen, but the Soviet Union is just about kind of still going. By the time you get to face the enemy, the Soviet Union has collapsed. It doesn't exist anymore. So it's kind of interesting. And all these stories, and also you get episodes like The Drumhead, I mentioned, like The Mind's Eye, doing a kind of Manchurian Candidate again. But those episodes sort of going back to the kind of 1950s era, going back to the kind of McCarthy Red Scare, going back to, the Manchurian Candidate starts in the Korean War, so sort of early 50s, and was published, I think, towards the end of that decade. So it's this sort of interesting question of, is Star Trek doing... It's not necessarily quite doing ripped from the headlines as much as there have been these more recent defections that have been going on. And it's a difficult time because it's like, are you doing historical drama or are you doing kind of contemporary drama? And apparently when they sent Sean Connery the script for The Hunt for Red October, initially he turned it down because he said, this is ridiculous. And this was in 1989 or something, presumably around the time the Berlin Wall was falling. He said, this is absurd, this wouldn't happen now. And they said, oh, no, this novel was written, whatever it was, like 5 or 6 years ago or something, and we'll say, and the very first thing you see in the film is it says in 1984, so it's like, it's very specific about saying, okay, this is not now, this is, a few years ago, essentially.
But behind the scenes, fun fact is that they faxed him the script, and they forgot to fax the first page.
Is that why?
That's
right,
why.
okay.
The first page is exactly what says in the, this
but they probably thought he didn't need it because it's just like, it's like text on the screen.
And then they ended up faxing him that page because he didn't understand. It's like, hey, this would never happen. And he's like, no, this is a few years ago. This is like, interesting. And obviously Connery, of course, as the archetypal 60s Cold War spy, essentially. I mean, basically, kind of interesting casting. Great casting, also interesting casting from that point of view. And also, of course, at the same time as Next Gen is putting the Romulans in this role, we've also got in the movies, the Klingons are still playing that role because you've got, around the same time as you mentioned, Unification, you've got Undiscovered Country, which is all about, the end of the Soviet Union, but with the Klingons as the Soviets in that instance. So it's kind of interesting that even though it's running simultaneously with Next Gen, it's still using the kind of original series, model in a sense, one way or another. Before we go, should we just have a little chat? I mean, we're recording here sort of end of July 2019, obviously a long way from the Cold War, but very close in time. Or at the beginning of a new one.
Well, let's hope not. But who knows? The way, politics is going right now, I wouldn't put anything past them. But we have literally just a couple of days ago seen the first trailer for the new Picard series. And obviously we know the Romulans are going to play a big role one way or another in that.
I thought that trailer was fantastic. I have watched it several dozen times now. I'm just in awe of the fact that in this day and age, when we know so many spoilers, when so many things, I loved the fact that I was genuinely surprised with the reveal of Seven, the Borg, and with Data. Or who we think is Data. Apparently, Brent Spiner said today that it was definitely Data.
I didn't expect any of those. I expected Romulans.
Because they talked about being the Romulans.
They talked about it being the Romulans, and also because we know that the combination of Nemesis and then the 2009 movie setting off this, this huge thing. I mean, blowing up Romulus, and then never showing us what happened next. It creates this kind of massive geopolitical shift in the Star Trek universe, essentially. That, I mean, obviously, if you read the novels, the novelists have had to kind of grapple with that. I think Star Trek Online has had to grapple, they're in the kind of ancillary material. They've had to grapple with what that means. But canonical Star Trek has never answered those questions. And it sort of seemed, I mean, I sort of assumed, because with the previous trailer, I think there was this talk of Picard leading some humanitarian mission. I always assumed that was to Romulus. Now, I don't know if that's going to turn out to be the case or not, because I think now that the Borg are involved, there are people speculating that there might be other elements there. But there's definitely a sense there seems to be quite a lot of Romulan characters in this story, as well as quite a lot of as well as quite a lot of Borg characters. There seem to be kind of links between those two elements of the story, and it seems like Picard is a linchpin between them, because obviously we know that Picard has links to the Borg, because obviously he was Locutus. He seems to know Seven personally. We know he knows Hugh. He's got a kind of history with the Borg one way or another, and with these other de-Borgified, those are the two other kind of de-Borged characters in a sense. But he's also got this kind of history with the Romulans, we're given to understand, not just what we saw in Next Gen, but obviously in Nemesis he was kind of there at this previous quite pivotal moment. What is his role? Is he a sort of friend to Romulus? Do the Romulans look up to him? It sort of feels that way. I mean, in Star Trek VI, we had this idea of Kirk as Nixon going to China as the old enemy. What does that make Picard? Because it seems like he's he was the enemy if you think of like Next Gen and Tomahawk and all that kind of stuff, but he's very much the enemy who wants to build bridges and has been, even for 20 years we've seen Picard. I mean, in Nemesis, whatever you think of the merits or not of that film, there is that moment quite early on in the film where he has this line about standing in the Romulan Senate and wanting to kind of open relations in a sense, to kind of tear down the Iron Curtain, basically, to kind of get rid of this because there is that sense, and even in the design of that Senate floor in that film, they have a design of the neutral zone, I think, don't you? And it does look like a curtain crossing across space, and there is that sense, the Romulans, they're always the other side of this this boundary, this division, and Picard seems to be wanting to kind of reach across to, just like Spock is trying to reunify with the Romulans and the Vulcans, this idea of trying to kind of bring them in from the cold, I suppose.
See, I don't think that obviously this is all pure speculation, and God knows in a year's time we shall revisit this and we can discuss and see how wrong we were or how right we were. I think that the story is going to play that he was, after the destruction of Romulus, he led a Federation task force to try to kind of help remaining Romulans or bring, do something with Romulan space, in Romulan space with survivors. They refer to it as humanitarian armada, things like that. So I think something like that is definitely the case. Hence why you have several Romulan characters, at least two, a male and an older male and the female, who are speaking to him as like they look up to him. Like, don't forget like who you are. But I think something happens with the Romulans. Maybe Starfleet Section 31 kills them. Something happens. He loses all faith in Starfleet, becomes a recluse, goes to Dagobah and makes wine. This character comes back who has some kind of link to the Romulans. I think we then find out that some kind of Romulan faction, Tal Shiar maybe, has done something with Borg and Borg technology, maybe to start to kind of reclaim power. Are they starting experimenting with Borg technology, Borg weapons? We see Romulans inside a Borg cube, right? So I'm thinking that they're using Borg technology, either deborging Borg or coming up with the next generation of Borg, potentially as a new army, because there are no more Romulans, so they have to figure out what to do. And I think there's kind of the connection. I think the story is very much about the Romulans. I think the story is very much about the Romulans using the Borg. Do they come in contact with a cube that Hugh in a post-descent world? It's like there's something clearly there. So I'm thinking that it's about Romulans using Borg technology for some nefarious means. And the captain gets involved, and is the Borg, is what's her, what Anish, or not Anish, the character's name. Anyway, the young woman that comes to Picard for help. Right. Is she, the Borg princess, or is she, made from Locutus's DNA, or all of this stuff, so I think there's definitely a connection there. But anyway, I'm thinking that that's more or less what's going to happen. I think obviously Picard goes to Starfleet. Starfleet is now this kind of in a Trump America world. They say, no, we're not going to help you. He goes rogue. He goes renegade, gets a crew to help him. Then they send Riker after him.
Wow. and Troi. And Troi. And Troi, who knows, maybe Troi will be,
maybe a little bit more useful. Mode. Yeah. But then I do think that Riker and him have some conflict. Because that's going to make great drama. Yeah. And in the end, Riker helps his old captain.
Okay. Cool. Well, we will come back in a year's time, and or less even, I think, and see whether we're right. But it's interesting. I mean, it certainly seemed like they were leaning on the Romulans up till that latest trailer, and then the fact that the Borg were really in there in a big way is the big shocker.
That's a big shocker.
That's the big surprise. And of course, it makes sense for Picard. Yeah. But at the same time, it's kind of, what does it mean for the bigger story? That's the real question, because we kind of knew they were going to have to address the Romulan issue one way or another. But addressing the Borg as well is, how are they going to handle those two story elements? And as you say, what are the links between them? Because it does seem like Romulans and the Borg, there's something going on there. Definitely.
And I mean, the inclusion,
and you wouldn't put past them.
No, of course not. I think the inclusion of Seven was so. Data kind of makes sense, especially if he's playing, if it's a holodeck sequence and he plays cards with Commander Data in the holodeck. I mean, that kind of makes sense. But I thought Seven makes sense from the point of view, if you look at Democleva, she's such an important character, such a popular character. If you look at, I tweeted the other day this old article from StarTrek.com where the Netflix revealed a few years ago the top 10 most watched episodes of Star Trek on Netflix. 8 out of the 10 of them all deal with the Borg. Right. Across Voyager and Next Gen, with 2 very random other ones. But, so, the popularity, the analytics, everything made sense of why including the Borg, but they hadn't said anything about the Borg. And when you could include the Borg, but then all of a sudden including Seven, it was amazing.
Well.
And Hugh. I mean, that's also a huge surprise.
Yeah, that is a big surprise. And that also, I suppose including Seven, you might think, because they wanted her in Nemesis, didn't they, originally? And she was the one then who was like, this is totally random. I've never met any of these characters before. Why would I be in this film? Forget it. But the fact you've got Hugh in there as well, I think kind of justifies it, because, first of all, it seemed from the trailer we're going to have to accept that she and Picard have some kind of long-standing relationship, because she talks to him in quite a familiar, which not like a first meeting. It's like she's clearly met him before. The fact that Hugh is in there as well does make you think, okay, these are 3 people who have one quite fundamental thing in common, that they were all like proper Borg, and to some degree or other, they're now Less Borg. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you do see in that trailer what looks like de-Borgifying processes going on, and people being kind of brought back from the Borg. So, maybe who knows, maybe that's the humanitarian mission, was to, maybe there are many more people now who were former Borg who could be redeemed and be kind of.
Yeah, and it makes sense that that, if Seven really, which she does at the end of Voyager, kind of really becomes like loves being human and starts to accept her humanity. Maybe in a post after, she's not going to join Starfleet. Yeah. What is she going to do? Maybe she becomes this kind of like, de-Borgifying mission of going out and finding old people who are Borg and unborging them. Yeah. Sounds like a painful, horrible process. But, I could see that that's kind of where they're going. And clearly, as the 2 humans, and, you talk about the comics and you talk about novels, Picard and Seven have a relationship. They meet. They in all other non-canon Trek, it makes sense that these 2 characters from 2 different series come together. Completely makes sense.
Well, because Seven, in a way, plays the data role, arguably in Voyager. I know the Doctor kind of plays the data role, but, in terms of having that relationship, the kind of mentor-mentee relationship between Picard and Data is very much... it's not quite the same with Seven, because Seven is more like the kind of unruly teenager who's giving Janeway a bit of a hard time, but at the same time, it's definitely that kind of parental dynamic again that you see played out there. So you're right. It makes a lot of sense. But we will have to wait and see exactly how the cards fall out. But it's been a pleasure talking about the Cold War, the Romulans, the Hunt for Red October. Carlos, if our listeners want to track you down on social media and let you know why they think that Gates McFadden is the best thing about that movie.
Right. Please do. I'd love to hear that argument, given that she's in the movie for like 28 seconds.
How can they do that? Where can they find you?
I'm mostly on Twitter, and it's at Double Mac, with MACC, which stands for Double Macchiato, which is my obsessive coffee. Janeway and I have one thing in common, which is our love and obsession with coffee. I'm less of an Americano like she does. I go for the espresso, so a little bit more chilly in that sense. But yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you again for joining me. It's been fun talking about the Hunt for Red October and Face of the Enemy and the Romulans this week, but that's not the only thing we've been doing on Trek FM. So here's a listen to what else you might have missed out on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, The Ready Room.
But Larry, how do you know that there's not a house somewhere out there on the Forge where Cybok's in the living room, Michael's in the living room, and there are like 6 other people in the living room that Amanda and Sarek and Spock never talk about.
They took us in for a while and they threw us in the house on the Forge.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Wait, so what switched between your two lists?
Calypso comes in, Runaway comes in second of importance.
Right. Okay.
But Calypso comes in second in enhancement of the season.
Okay. I see.
And really, even in importance, I could probably, in my head, flip Calypso and Runaway. Because I don't need Runaway.
Standard Orbit.
Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, is the best named movie of the first 6 movies, I think. Because from a marketing point of view, from a Star Trek point of view, it's just a great title. You know, not talking about the execution of the film, I just mean it's a great title. The other movie titles were you know, I mean, they weren't that creative.
Literary Treks.
So I think if you have an idea or a story for a Star Trek novel, you would be better served if that came on the heels of the 10 pieces of fan fiction that you've written or whatever, or things that you've written on your own that not necessarily fan fiction, but if you've practiced as a writer and have honed your craft, because they're going to want you to be a good writer.
Yeah, they're gonna, and that comes back to, you know, they're gonna tie in editors, and this is not just Star Trek. This is anybody. They're gonna go with people who have demonstrated an ability to hit their marks clean, easy to work with, or at least able to work with, and can do that on a. It's like, okay, I did it once. No, okay, well now do it again. Now do it again. Now do it 3 times in a row. Now do it 5 times in this one calendar year.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they're published. And please leave us a star rating and a written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Primitive Culture, and that will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, so we really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you can find all our details at patreon.com/TrekFM. We'd like to take a moment now to thank our associate producers on Primitive Culture, Amy Nelson, Clara Cook, and Tony Black. Amy is a presenter of many other shows on the network, and you can find her on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson. Clara and Tony were 2 of the former co-hosts of this show, and they'll be popping back from time to time. You can find Clara on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC, and Tony at AJ Black Writer.
You're blended, all right.